Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast. This Week in America. In Liberty in America, past, present, and future, renowned dentist and health policy expert Dr. Bill Choby presents how America, as the empire of liberty, has achieved freedom through the godliness and goodness of its citizens. Providing an essential insight into America's past, it demonstrates how the country's great forefathers fought against an oppressive government and sought freedom from political bondage through their selflessness and their God-fearing personalities. Although Dr. Choby is a practicing implant surgeon and dentist in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, he also has been a first-hand reenactor of a middle-aged Colonel George Washington, reflecting on his adventures during the French and Indian War. Dr. Bill Choby, author of Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, A Prescription for America, joins us on This Week in America. Doctor, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. So much to talk about here. And the video version, you can see this by going to our YouTube channel, and you'll see the video up, the book cover of the book Liberty in America. And when I mentioned a reenactor, you had even posed as a middle-aged George Washington for a famous painting one time, didn't you?
Yes, it was quite an interesting take, a little side hobby that I had. It was in this particular area of the country. The French and Indian War is really what set the stage for the American Revolution. And of course, my character, Colonel George, was very much involved with that. So it sort of tied into 250th anniversary, and it fit in rather well, and I think was well approved by the people.
And very well renowned you are in your area for your portrayal in riding the horse in parades and various civic events. So you've done your homework. You know exactly what you're talking about here, which makes this book so powerful, Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future. What was the inspiration? Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, it's multifactorial, I must say. I lived in a town in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, famous for the floods, which at one time was one of the most wealthiest communities in the country because of the coal and steel that was there. After a flood in 1977, the community was devastated. And trying to rise out of the ashes was compounded by the fact that the community was run by a bunch of godfathers who had attained their power during the quiet years of great wealth. Because it was in the hands of a few, it compromised the natural competition between the political forces that one would find in a healthy government, democracy or republic, if you will. As I tried to struggle with that situation, I found that there was basically a strong-armed man who was going against anyone who challenged his power. Eventually, this led to the high rise of Johnstown to one of the worst communities in the country, with one of the highest unemployment of 26% and more currently, it's the one of the poorest communities in the country and one of the fastest shrinking community in the country, all because of the natural processes of what we would consider political discourse were blocked because the hands of the few godfathers or the strong men refused to let anybody share the power to bring any kind of new ideas into it. So that sort of set the stage for me. And then as a result of that, I got involved with politics. I ran for Congress a number of times against the strong men and their organization, and only to find more and more about just how corrupting.
I'm sure. Yes.
So having political monopolies are no different than business monopolies, as we've seen with the big companies at the time of the turn of the century. Teddy Roosevelt, and he's busting all the big companies. Political monopolies are no different. You end up with fewer products, higher prices, and less freedom. So that sort of set the backstage. I started to write about this.
I would love to see you write another book in talking about the political monopolies and running against established candidates and the chosen candidates. That would be interesting. But at hand, we're talking about Dr. Choby's current book, Liberty in America. What is the difference between liberty and freedom?
Well, that's a good question. Liberty is basically freedom given by a political body or given by government. Freedom itself is more like self-determination of man. It's more like a natural law thing. there's not necessarily the same, particularly when it comes into governments that have mounds and mounds of laws. Liberty is restricted, where individual freedom to get down the street or drive your car isn't necessarily restricted by it. So liberty is freedom with responsibility to a set of political boundaries, whereas freedom is self-determination without constraint.
You know, your answers are so understandable, and you'll find that as you're reading the book, Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future. This is a topic that sometimes scholars get all caught up in. You finish, and it's like, I have no idea what the guy just said or gal just said. With your book, it's very straightforward. It's well written. That's why the book is doing so well. You'll find it at Amazon, all of the usual places. Dr. Bill Choby, that's Choby, all of this on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. What do you mean by when might is right, the people groan in bondage?
Well, if you consider that might is power, political power, whenever the might is determined by arbitrarily, say for a king, it used to be a king would say, here's the law today, and they wouldn't converse with any parliaments or congresses, whatever. They would just say, this is a law, and if you didn't follow it, you had the consequences of the law. Part of the problem is that when you have that kind of arbitrary rule of law, people don't know what it is, and they live in bondage with fear of being for retribution for not following the laws that they're not aware of. So it's a strongman sort of culture, and people are kept in bondage to keep the strongman strong. It's sort of what I found in Johnstown.
Well, that's what it sounds like there, yes. And let me just take that a step further. What is meant by the rule of might?
Well, that's the strongman rules, and with arbitrary decisions about what is right, what the consequences might be. So I guess maybe in a sense it's sort of like the mafia, you know. You sort of, there's a cultural expectation that if you violate it, you're in trouble.
Well, it's interesting.
That's what the rule of might.
Well, yeah, and you've touched on that, but this is so important for us to understand and even relate to our own circumstances. Who decides what is right?
Now, that's really the key. What is right? So there's debates between what's common sense and natural law. You know, there's certain things that apply to everybody, every animal out there, as well as people. But the concept of right being just, a law that's fair, that people can universally understand as being a good thing, if you will. That's what deciding who decides what is right is part of what the strongman does, or in the case of laws, decide what the law may be. So I know it sounds a little bit vague, but that in essence is it's what's right or wrong.
No, unfortunately, I know exactly what you're saying. It just because it's like when you hear it, and it's like, you know, I can relate to that situation. I understand what he's talking about. The book is Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, A Prescription for America by Dr. Bill Choby, Choby. Book available Amazon, all of the usual places. You'll find a link for Dr. Choby's website, Amazon site, by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Okay, let me take it a step further again, because as you say something, I keep thinking, okay, what about, in this case, what about the rule of law? What exactly is the rule of law?
Well, this, as compared to the rule of might, the rule of law is at least a set of laws that are written that can be observed or understood by many, and that it's unchanging. This is the real important thing. The rule of law is not arbitrary and unchanging. It's set, versus the rule of might is arbitrary and unchanging. So that in most cases, it's written law. So to do that, you have to take it a step further back. You have to understand that you have to have things such as an alphabet.
Yes.
You have to have things such as a language or sentences that are universally understood to have a true rule of law that affects all people. That hasn't always been the case. Some of the earliest laws, say the Code of Hammurabi, was written by the 18th century BC in Babylon. And it was basically made up of a lot of little characters, little diamond-shaped characters. Now, I don't know how many of the average Babylonian understood what the relationship or the arrangement of diamond-shaped characters meant to them. But in essence, it was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So it's code of laws that arbitrarily determined by Hamburg himself, who claimed that he was a heavenly messenger, blah, blah, blah. But,
yes. When did we find these laws?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's the beginning of, finish that thought because it's so important.
Yeah, well, that's because of this. And here was something for the first time, as we know, because things do change, between hieroglyphics and cuneiform writing with characters. This is the first time we know that somebody really sat down and wrote something. But again, whether it's widely understood or widely applicable remains to be seen, because most of the population at that time was illiterate. So until you get into some form of literacy, it's still the rule of might. Do you understand?
Yes, I fully understand. So when exactly were the laws written in common language? And again, you say when they were, most people probably didn't understand that anyway, but when did that actually happen? We're going back centuries.
Yes, we are. Probably around the 15th century BC is when characters started to emerge. These were found in the copper mines in Egypt, as a matter of fact, and it's related to the reign of Joseph. Remember Joseph, the Bible, was coat of many colors?
Yes.
About that time, there started to emerge the use of characters. Now, the letter A, for example, we see a point at the top and two at the bottom. That originally was on its side, and it represented the head of an oxen. So a lot of more commonly seen things started to become characters that were then, at least standing by themselves, had a certain value. This is what hieroglyphics are. They're a symbol of something. So you would read from symbol to symbol. But until you got into a form of a sentence form where there's a continuation or use of multiple symbols to create a word, that's a whole different story. And that first occurred as we know, and this is the latest research on this now, mind you, the first time letters were put into a sentence form that essentially formed a set of laws was the Ten Commandments. So it was written in stone by the finger of God. God gave us sentences with the original Hebrew alphabet of 22 characters. And of course, those 22 later on became 24 for the Greek, and as in America, as we know it today, English language is 26 characters. So you can understand how things would change because just the differences of two letters in an alphabet. But that was the beginning. The original rule of law written was by the finger of Yahweh on Mount Sinai, given to Moses.
A fascinating history lesson we're getting on the program today from the book Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, A Prescription for America by Dr. Bill Choby, our guest on the program, renowned dentist, health policy expert. What do you mean by when right is might, the people are free?
Another good question. Thank you. Whenever we have a common understanding of what's fair, what's just among people. Now, Code of Hamburg was saying eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The Ten Commandments came along and said, don't kill, don't steal, don't covet your wife or whatever, or don't lie. At least those three, killing, stealing, and lying, which formed the foundation of Western jurisprudence. It became the basis of Western civilization, those principal laws. So they're universally recognized, even in cultures that never even heard of Moses. They say, well, it's not good to kill. They know inherently that it's not good to kill or to steal or to tell lies about people because there are consequences for it. So those right there, that's a form of what we would call right. Right means might. So if our laws, our subsequent written laws, reflect those basically understood values who are understood by all, then you have right becomes might. So when that happens, everybody knows the rules, if you will, because it's based on something they all understand, and that gives you your freedom.
You talk about when right becomes wrong, the people live in chaos. Explain that, please.
Yes. Now, when you come to a similar situation, actually what we have occurring in America today, where what we understand as being right, like killing, for example, and just look at abortion here, for example. A lot of people feel that that's killing. Other people say, well, it's a choice. What happens is that there's chaos. Well, who's right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes.
So that chaos causes people to take sides, and basically it harms liberty because one side disagrees with the other. So freedom is not as free, if you will. That's one example, but we can go in a lot of different ways. They say, we could say capital punishment, for example. Is that right? Is that wrong? So you see what happens whenever you start changing the fundamental view of what's morally right and correct living, and people don't understand exactly those guidelines, and that creates chaos. And with the chaos, we see stuff like we have in the streets today in a lot of our major cities. It's chaotic because there are people there that don't understand what is universally understood as right or wrong.
In the book, Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, you also talk about until right becomes might and the people are free again. Explain that.
Well, going back to the concept of right being determined by universally understood moral laws that people are able to live with, are peaceful about, when that becomes the law of the land or the standard of the land, then people are free. Because, okay, we all know what the rules are. You're free to go in and operate within these set of rules, the liberty that's provided by government. And when you operate within the boundaries of those rules of morally understood, universally understood rules, then people accept it and they go about their lives peacefully. So that's when they're free.
Well, the subtitle for the book, A Prescription for America. What can Americans do to make right might again?
Right, well, remember what we said about political monopolies.
Yeah, that's where we started, yes.
It's always the strong man that creates chaos. So we've got to get back to where we have the power of the American political scene back into the hands of people who understand the concept of right becoming might, that we've got to have laws that are universally recognized, inherently recognized as being the right way to live. And to do that, that means in our country, we vote people in and out of office. But again, if we have a monopoly of politics, there's a tendency to move from right to what fits them politically and what enhances their careers and their wealth and everything else. So that takes me to the conclusion of my book, because part of this was that I discuss how all these changes occurred with the development of bureaucracy in the 1860s and 70s and how that's grown into its own thing. It's a leviathan at this point, basically untouchable by the voter. And it's a lot of those bureaucracies that cause much of the restrictions that we have on business and on personal life and things like this. And there's very little accountability. So we have a creation of a political monopoly. And most people say, well, we have an election every so many years. We elect these people, but they're in there forever. They're career politicians. So the one thing Americans can do is vote against incumbents. I mean, they should only be in there for a short period of time. Originally, it was proposed by during the Federalist Papers that the more power you had, the shorter your term of office should be, because we didn't want tyrants such as King George telling us what to do and creating new tea parties. But within the Constitution itself, there's Article 5, which is the one that has to do with amendments to the Constitution. And I'd like to read a little bit of it to you, because most people aren't familiar with the Constitution.
Please.
In essence, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislators of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. Now, to make that simple, Congress in Washington, the President, and the Supreme Court are not the only ones who can change our laws, our Constitution. The states can do this, because originally the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, came from the states. The states created the federal government. It's not the other way around. And the power of the federal government comes from the states up, not from the top down. And the way the states can react to this current crisis, where we have career politicians who've never worked in the private sector at the highest level of government, have been there forever, have amassed huge forms of wealth, the only way we can deal with it in a peaceable way, as described by George Washington in his farewell address, is for the states to get together, 2/3 of them. In this case, where we have 50 states today, that would be 34. If those legislatures get together and say, you know what, we want to make an amendment to the Constitution that limits their terms of office. That's all we want to do, is limit their terms of office. And if all 34 states come around and they say, okay, we're on with that, then it goes to all the states, and 3/4 of all the states say, yes, we like that. we're going to do that. Their legislators pass it and it goes and the governor signs it, all that stuff. Then the Constitution is changed without the consent of the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives or the President or the Supreme Court. That's the fallback that Alexander Hamilton gave to us during the deliberations of the American Constitution. And I believe that it's very doable as that momentum is growing with the amount of resentment that's occurring across the country to the Washington top-down politics of, say, the border, of the way the money's being spent over this pandemic. It's a very doable thing. And the number of states who are fully signed on to this now is 15. There's another 20 or so that are deliberating this at this current time. And I'm sure as these dictates keep coming from Washington, that even more states will get on board and effectively limit the terms of power to the congressmen and the senators by saying you can only be in there for a couple of terms, and that's it.
Boy, this time has gone by so quickly. A fascinating conversation from a fascinating book, Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, A Prescription for America. The author, our guest, Dr. Bill Choby, that's C-H-O-B-Y, book available at Amazon, of course, all of the usual places. We'll have a link on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dr. Choby, it's been a pleasure. You make this quite understandable. I love the approach you take in the book, as well as a conversation. You make it something we understand and want to take part in, and that's a key, want to take part in this. The subtitle, again, is A Prescription for America. An important book. Thank you for being with us on the program.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation as well.
It has been a pleasure having as our guest on the program, Dr. Bill Choby, C-H-O-B-Y, Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future, A Prescription for America. Book at Amazon, wherever books are sold. Information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.